In a dry cave, artifacts were found that underwent repeated radiocarbon dating, revealing an age much older than previously thought possible. In southern Oregon, archaeologists from the University of Oregon made this fascinating discovery that could rewrite part of the history of the Americas. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. It directly challenges the traditional theory that identified the Clovis culture as the continent's first inhabitants. The evidence indicates that humans were already inhabiting the Americas thousands of years earlier, suggesting that the settlement of the continent began much sooner than textbooks had claimed. For decades, the explanation seemed simple. The first inhabitants of the Americas were thought to be the Clovis people, identified based on an archaeological site discovered in the state of New Mexico. They were skilled hunters, known for crafting sophisticated grooved spear points, designed to be lighter, stronger, and more efficient during the hunt. The traditional theory, known as the Clovis consensus, held that the first humans crossed Beringia, the land bridge between Asia and Alaska, about 13,000 years ago, traveling down the continent through a corridor between the glaciers. This explanation was the unquestioned scientific dogma for most of the 20th century, widely repeated in books and documentaries. This narrative began to crumble when archaeologists decided to excavate deeply into the Paisley Caves, a complex of dry caves in south-central Oregon. Although the site had been known for decades, it had never been analyzed with the technological rigor necessary to reveal the secrets buried in its deepest layers. No one had dug deep enough, and when they finally did, what they pulled from the ground was not a weapon. It was not a tool. It was something no one expected: human feces, preserved, dried, and hardened over thousands of years, lying exactly where they had been left. The dry desert air had accomplished a feat that not even the best museums would be able to replicate. It had preserved an extremely fragile organic trace for an almost unimaginably long period of time. And within those inconspicuous fragments of ancient material lay something no stone tool could provide: human DNA. When scientists extracted and sequenced the mitochondrial DNA from the samples, the result was indisputable. The genetic material corresponded to the founding haplogroups of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, A2 and B2. These people were direct ancestors of today's indigenous peoples. This was neither a vanished population nor a failed migration that left no descendants. They were the actual ancestors of the people who live in the Americas to this day. People with families, names, and lineages stretching back millennia and leading all the way to a cave that most of the world had never even heard of. Then came the dating. The technique used was accelerator mass spectrometry, a method capable of directly measuring the age of organic materials without relying on the soil or surrounding objects. After calibrating the results, the preserved remains revealed an age of more than 14,000 years before the present, at least 1,000 years before the arrival of the Clovis people. The Clovis were not the first. They didn't even come close. And there is a part of this story that few are willing to admit. The Paisley Caves were not the first evidence to challenge this narrative. They were merely the discovery that finally broke through the barrier of resistance. The first major crack appeared decades earlier, on the other side of the country, in a sandstone rock shelter in western Pennsylvania. The Meadowcroft Rock Shelter is located on the banks of a small stream, about 11 kilometers from the Ohio River. Its overhangs jut out from the hillside, forming a sort of natural roof. One archaeologist even described it as a perfect prehistoric inn, the kind of place where ancient travelers would likely spend the night without a second thought. In 1955, a local historian named Albert Miller reached into a groundhog burrow on the property, scooped out a handful of dirt, and found artifacts that shouldn't have been there. When systematic excavations began in 1973, it was believed that virtually everything was already known about the earliest inhabitants of the New World. That same year, scientist Jim Adovasio began meticulous excavations at the site, removing layer after layer of soil. The deeper he dug, the older the evidence became. When the results of the radiocarbon analyses came back, they indicated that humans had visited Meadowcroft between approximately 16,000 and 19,000 years ago. In July 1980, Adovasio published the results in the scientific journal American Antiquity and openly declared that the Clovis the Fur model was wrong. The reaction was intense. Some researchers alleged sample contamination, others simply ignored the study. Over time, scientists gave a name to this resistance. They called it the Clovis primacy syndrome and described its continued defense as anachronistic and futile. A survey of archaeologists showed that, even today, only 38% agree with the dates proposed by Adovasio. Another 38% remain undecided. The rest continue to reject the findings. Thus, when the Paisley discoveries emerged, the traditional narrative was already showing cracks. Paisley merely made it impossible to ignore them. And then, about 113 kilometers from Paisley, at a site almost no one knew about, another breakthrough was about to occur. On the outskirts of the small town of Riley in Harney County lies the Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter. University of Oregon archaeologist Dr. Patrick O'Grady has been excavating the site since 2011. Rimrock Draw yielded no DNA. Instead, it yielded stone tools, animal bones, and a chronology recorded in volcanic ash. The most important clue was a layer of white ash buried in the soil, serving as a natural time marker. Scientists identified that ash as originating from a specific eruption of Mount St. Helens, dated to between approximately 15415 and 15600 years ago. Anything below that layer had to be older. Anything above it was younger. It was a natural clock etched into the earth itself by a volcano that had erupted more than 1,600 kilometers away. Below that layer, the team began to find evidence that shouldn't have existed. 27 small fragments of tooth enamel were recovered from the soil. One belonged to the so-called yesterday's camel, a species that lived in North America during the last ice age. Another belonged to Bison antiquus, a larger and more robust ancestor of the modern American bison. Both species had been extinct for thousands of years. Yet there they were, buried in the same soil and beneath the same layer of ash. Then came the tool. In the same layer, the team found a stone tool made of orange chalcedony, a glassy variety of agate that reflects light strikingly. The artifact had multiple working surfaces, a curved edge for cutting, a flat edge for scraping, and a serrated edge worn down by heavy use. Patrick O'Grady later compared it to a primitive Swiss Army knife. The tool's teeth were polished by years of use, a wear pattern that doesn't develop in a week or even a month. It's the kind of mark that takes a lifetime to form. Whoever owned it carried it, sharpened it, resharpened it, and used it repeatedly until, at some point, it was left behind and never recovered. The tool's position changed everything. It lay about 10 centimeters below the camel tooth fragments, which meant it was older than the animal remains themselves. And those remains, upon analysis, revealed an age far greater than anyone was prepared to accept. The lab ran the test once, then it ran it again. Both analyses pointed to the same time frame. The camel and bison teeth were dated to between approximately 21,000 and 22,000 years old. O'Grady, upon seeing the second result confirming the first, later admitted that it was extremely unsettling to deal with such an ancient date. According to him, no one wants to announce something like this without solid evidence to back it up. But now there were two samples, two independent tests, and two identical results. The animals at Rimrock Draw died more than 18,000 years ago, and the stone tool found beneath their teeth suggested that someone had been there even before that. I thought, My God, we have a date of 15,800 years for the ash layer. We have tooth fragments beneath it that turned out to be from a camel. And beneath that, we have a tool located more than 40 centimeters below the ash layer. These stone tools belong to a category that scientists call the Western stem tradition. They have long blades, slightly pronounced shoulders, and rounded bases. They bear no resemblance whatsoever to Clovis points. They were produced by different people, following distinct traditions, possibly originating from a completely different region of the world. They predate the Clovis style by thousands of years. Whoever made these tools was not Clovis. It was something entirely different, but Oregon was just the beginning. About 120 kilometers to the south, in a gypsum desert that virtually no one had studied closely, 61 footprints lay waiting beneath the dust. And the people who left them there shouldn't have existed. White Sands National Park in southern New Mexico is a vast expanse of white gypsum dunes. In 2009, researchers walking through ancient dried-up lake beds began to notice preserved marks on the ground. They were human footprints. Not just one or two, but 61 fossilized tracks left by people who walked along the shores of an Ice Age lake known as Lake Otero. The imprints were so clear that it was possible to distinguish the toes and the curvature of the arches of the feet. Some belonged to children, others belonged to adults who appeared to be walking quickly, almost running. They were entire groups moving through a landscape that had long since disappeared. A moment frozen in time, recorded in the mud, hardened by the sun, and buried by sediments for thousands of years. The first attempt to date these footprints took place in 2021. Researchers used seeds found in the same sedimentary layers, and the results indicated an age between 21,000 and 23,000 years. The discovery sparked immediate controversy. Critics argued that the seeds might have absorbed carbon from groundwater, and thus appeared older than they actually were. To address this criticism, scientists conducted new tests using conifer pollen found in the same layers. Since pollen is not subject to this type of contamination, the result was considered more reliable. Even so, the dates remained exactly the same. In June 2025, a third study published in the scientific journal Science Advances analyzed organic matter extracted from wetland, mud, and lake sediments. Once again, the results matched. 3 independent methods pointed to the same period, between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago, during the height of the last ice age. Human footprints also appeared alongside the tracks left by Columbian mammoths and giant ground sloths, species that had been extinct for thousands of years. For many archaeologists, this alone would have been an extraordinary discovery. But there was something even more impressive. In Southern California, a crew working on a highway construction project stumbled upon something unexpected when a machine struck a buried object. Work was halted, and paleontologists were called in. What they found were the remains of a mastodon, a distant relative of modern elephants that went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. However, the bones exhibited something unusual. They had spiral fractures, a type of break that occurs only when the bone is still fresh. Fossilized bones simply snap, fresh bones twist and break in this characteristic manner. This suggested that someone had deliberately broken those bones to extract the bone marrow. Among the remains were also 5 large stones that did not belong in that environment. They were too heavy to have been transported by water. Everything indicated that they had been brought there and used as hammers and anvils. When the uranium-thorium dating tests were completed, the results were astonishing. The bones were approximately 130,700 years old. In 2017, the scientific journal Nature published the study led by Stephen Holen, Kathleen Holen, Thomas Desmarais, and Richard Fulligar. The conclusion was extraordinary. Some human species had been in North America more than 130,000 years ago. It was not necessarily Homo sapiens, nor were they Neanderthals. It was something that simply did not fit into current models. For decades, the prevailing explanation for the settlement of the Americas revolved around Beringia, the land bridge connecting Asia to North America. But new evidence began to point to another possibility. What if some of the earliest inhabitants hadn't arrived on foot? What if they had come by sea? One clue emerged on the island of Crete, which has been isolated from the mainland for about 5 million years. Anyone who arrived there had to cross the sea. Researchers led by Thomas Strasser and Eleni Panagopoulou found stone tools dating from 130,000 to 700,000 years ago. These tools exhibited characteristics associated with groups such as Homo heidelbergensis and Homo erectus. If these ancient humans were capable of building boats and crossing the Mediterranean, then the idea that they could not navigate the open sea loses credibility. Genetic studies have further reinforced this possibility. Researchers who analyzed a mitochondrial DNA lineage called D4H traced its origin to the northern Chinese coast and found evidence of two distinct major migrations to the Americas. Recent archaeological and genetic discoveries propose a model of the peopling of the Americas, based on multiple waves of migration. The first wave is thought to have occurred about 26,000 years ago, with groups circumnavigating the continent via coastal sea routes. The second wave, dating back approximately 15,000 years, utilized the Beringia land route and gave rise to the populations associated with the Clovis tradition. This new picture replaces the old linear dogma with a much older and more complex narrative. Irrefutable evidence, such as the fossil footprints at White Sands, the worked bones from the Cerruti site, the work Tausui Furibisoren, the millennia-old tools from Rimrock Draw, and the coprolites containing human DNA found in the Paisley Caves, demonstrates that the first humans reached the continent thousands of years earlier than previously thought. In light of these findings, science is rewriting history to uncover the true identity and journey of the real American pioneers.